Dear class, welcome to Lectures in International Relations. In this lecture, we're going to talk about states and also governments and see how they are different. So earlier, we talked a little bit about what states are, and I'm going to go through what we covered earlier. In international relations, we say that a state is an entity that is independent of other states in the international system. It has sovereignty, meaning it has the authority to govern over a territory and population. So essentially consider countries, right? So these countries are independent of each other. They do not have any control over each other, right? So we say that the US is a state, and so is the People's Republic of China. India is similarly a state, and so are Mexico and Senegal. However, there are territories which are not considered to be a state. Arkansas is considered to be part of the US. Puerto Rico and Guam are supposed to be territories also part of the US. And Greenland, we think it looks like an independent territory, but actually it's under the Kingdom of Denmark. Similarly, large land masses, which we call continents, such as Africa, Asia, North America, South America, and Europe, these have many, many states inside them, right? We say there are 195 independent states or countries today. Some are not recognized by all countries. For example, Taiwan, Israel, Cuba, and Palestine. There's a lot of pressure from particular countries not to recognize these states. For example, with respect to Taiwan, we know that China is opposed to Taiwan being independent. And so it puts political pressure on countries to not recognize Taiwan. Similarly, due to the Israel-Palestine conflict, many Muslim countries do not recognize or do not still have diplomatic relations with Israel. And many countries do not have diplomatic relations with Cuba due to pressure from the US. Do states exist perpetually? This is basically a question that you should be able to answer if you've watched the videos that have been linked, right? You have the history of the world, which you just watched this week, and you have the history of Europe. You know, you have basically seen how empires have appeared and disappeared in the same area, right? One day it might be called say Prussia. The next day it might be called Germany. The next day it might be called the Holy Roman Empire, and again, Germany, right? So all kinds of name changes are happening. What else is going on? So we'll look at those things. We also looked at the history of the Protestant Reformation and the 30 Years' War, and also the Westphalian system. How did it come about, right? So those videos are interesting. It tells you a little bit about the political history of Europe. So there are challenges to sovereignty, right? Internally, civil war might break out, as we saw in the Protestant Reformation video. Externally, you can have wars between or among states. Government. What is government? We are going to try and make the point that states are very different from government. States are the territory, we say it's an entity which has the right to govern itself, right? But here, we know that somebody is actually doing the work of governing. So governments are essentially what run states. States don't run themselves. Governments run states. So who governs the state? It's almost like asking who runs the place, right? Those in charge definitely run the place, but what else is going on here? So it's almost like looking at, say, the owner of the house hires somebody to govern the house. Might call them the governess, right? So the governess is like the government, and the owner of the house is basically the state. Who decides who governs? So this will depend on the political system. As you saw, when you have monarchy, you have kings and queens running the government, right? They are the heads of the state. When you have an aristocracy, you have nobility, basically some kind of lords or like soldiers might be running the place. These are the leaders, political heads of the state. In a democracy, you have people deciding, right, through the electorate. They're voting for the head of the state or the head of the government. In a republic, you have similar kinds of voting with some kinds of checks and balances. So let's stop here about states and governments. In the next lecture, which will be next week, you will look at the history of Europe and how it impacted concepts of international relations. So let's stop here.